Okay, so I'm going to do this video on conflict resolution. So the grade level is going to be second grade. The content area is going to be conflict resolution. It's under domain 2 under guidance of the Texas Model Scope of Guidance curriculum. It's strands 1, 2, 3, 6, and 7. I know you might be saying, what about 4 and 5? 4 and 5 have to do with career, as we've learned last week, super, super important. However, just not relevant to the conflict resolution lessons. And I actually chose this because when I taught second grade, it was something that I actually went to the school counselor about. I had a class that physically fought a lot, like a lot. And then in the middle of the year is when we got the influx of newcomer students from the Middle East region and the African region. And just the way that they played was a little bit rougher than American standards. So sometimes that could lead to physical altercations with some of my native born students. So it was a really rough year. It was a lot of things going on, and so I asked the school counselor for help. And unfortunately, he did not finish. Like, he told him he was going to come 3 times and do lessons with them. He did not come 3 times. He came 1 time. Um, so I remember watching it being like, I could do this because I wanted to be a school counselor by that point. I just hadn't, taught enough yet. But I was like, I can do this. I just don't have the time to do it because I have to teach them the actual like content, the teaks. So here's my chance to prove that to you guys. So students will be shown 3 conflict resolution skills through different scenarios and act out the situation. As you know from my last video, I love role playing. I love acting it out, especially with these younger kids, these elementary age kids, especially the lower grades of elementary school. Just gets them more involved. Whenever they're moving around, in a part of the process, they listen and absorb it a lot more than if they're just being like, it's like you're teaching with them, not teaching at them. I think that's super, super important. And that should be best practices too, if it's not already. The goal is students will be able to name, understand, implement the 3 conflict resolution skills. And I said when necessary because, as you'll see, there's some skills that you would use in certain situations, but not other situations. And the reason I chose 3 is because, again, with second graders and them, most of them were below grade level intelligence, so most of them weren't even at a second grade level. So I think just 3 skills is just like what would have been most effective for my population. And then, of course, when you have those newcomer students, it's you don't want to do things that are going to overwhelm them. So contributions to this lesson definitely go out to the responsive counselor from TPT, or teachers. It was formerly known as Teachers Pay Teachers, but now it just goes by TPT, even though we've all been calling it that for a while. She also has her own website called theresponsivecounselor.com. I definitely recommend checking her out. She has some really good stuff, not just for conflict resolution, but school counseling in general. So yeah, I would definitely check her out. I used her kind of as a guide. I looked at what she did for conflict resolution and the 3 skills I got from her, and the idea of coming up with examples I thought of her, but the role playing, like that was me. So I I used her lessons as a guide, and then the meat of it, I would say, is I did with relevant to my population. So I want to make that clear, but I still definitely want to give her a bunch of credit and a shout out. And again, like this lesson plan wouldn't be nearly as effective if it wasn't for the responsive counselor from Teachers Pay Teachers. And please check out her website if you need ideas. So the resources is we would need this PowerPoint, right, or PowerPoint of the conflict resolution, basic items in the classroom. I worked at a Title I school, so I'm used to let's pretend this marker's a fork. We can do that if we need to. I don't want the kids, or if I'm going into a classroom, the teacher to be like, I'll find this, or what do you need? I want to make it as seamless as possible. No issues as much little issues as possible. So I'm pretty flexible and pretty good. We're gonna be good at using our imaginations. And I said I think kids it's good for kids to use their imaginations. It's good for them. Get them off the screens. Um, However, like I said, this lesson is based on my students' needs and abilities. So skill one is to ignore. I would first ask the students, what does it mean to ignore someone? I consider ignore a tier two word. I'm sure as teachers, y'all are familiar with tier one, tier two, tier three. Um, I, I would say for my kids, definitely, I think it would be a tier two word. So I think it's important to ask for examples because kids may not be able to give you like the, textbook definition of ignore, but most of the, not most, I was just going to say most of them, but some of them at least know what does, like, can give you an example. And then other kids are like, oh, okay, it's kind of like this. And then you hear other examples, and then like more people are understanding it because if I just give an example and it's not relevant to them, they're going to be like, okay. But if they give examples and then one kid's like, okay, now I get it. And then they give an example. Now I get it. Now I get it. It's like, it's a domino effect. And it's actually really, really cool because then again, like, they're becoming the teachers too, and that's part of this process. That's how it's going to be effective, is that again we're learning together. I'm not teaching at them, I'm teaching with them. It's important to make sure the student knows this is not, and I bolded and all cap this on purpose, an effective skill when someone can get hurt. And again, I would ask and give examples. So obviously I would and if they were like stopped, like they didn't really know an example, like my goal with this is that they know that, hey, if someone gets punched in the face, that's not a time you ignore that. Or if someone touches you inappropriately, that is not a time to ignore that. So there's certain times that you don't ignore things, and I think that's important to teach as well, is to not, because not all problems you can ignore. This skill would be used when someone is trying to distract the student during class, or if the student encourages another student to misbehave. This is really my goal with ignoring, and I'm about to give an example, which is, and I just want to make it clear with all my examples, I'm not using actual students' names. Sometimes I'm using like scenarios that happen in my class, but if I'm using a scenario that happened, I'm not using the name of any. I would never use the names of my students in a scenario, especially in a scenario they actually did that. No, on confidentiality. Not going to do that. But here's my example. James is getting off task and trying to talk to his friend, Samir. James tells Samir they should draw pictures of Sonic. Instead of talking and drawing, Samir stays focused on his work. Samir was then able to talk to his friend during lunch and recess instead of talking during class and getting in trouble. Now, a couple of things with this example. I did use Sonic on purpose. Why? Because this is like a real life situation that happened in my class. This is a relevant topic. My kids loved Sonic. I think it's because the movies had just come out or whatever, but yeah, so that's a relevant thing. If I were to say, Rugrats, that's a show from like my childhood, but they might be like, what's that? Or like, that show's old. And then I don't want them to say that either, because then I'm gonna feel bad, and then I'm gonna need some conflict resolution. Just kidding. Instead of so I did pick Sonic on purpose. And then instead of and then again, they're seeing that there are times when you can talk, and there's times when you need to be quiet. So it's giving them a real life example that they can relate to, or this, I won't say all of them, but that some of them can relate to. Now, the part they're gonna love, acting it out. So you want to act out ignoring. So student volunteers will be chosen to act out the situation. I really want to give every child that's in the group an opportunity to participate. However, if they don't want to, I definitely would not force them to. I don't believe in that. But before a student would get like a second turn to be like, in the acting out, they would have to make sure that every student has an opportunity. That I totally believe in fairness. I also I would love if the teacher, happened to have a randomizing system, or if I'm hosting it in my office, we always were required to do popsicle sticks. I just think it's very important to not pick on where they can be like, oh, she's only picking on boys, or she's only picking on girls, or only picking on people with red t-shirts. It's just that way. It's like, look, I'm not showing any bias. So 2 students will act it out. 1 will be working and 1 will be distracting the student. The working student will demonstrate how to ignore the other student by staying focused on his work. So, I might give that student a book or a worksheet, and they would stay focused doing it while their friend was, drawing and telling them, hey, draw with me. So and then we're going to reflect. What did the student do when his friend was distracting him? And, again, I'm going to ask, for, hands to be raised. And then what would you do? What would have been a bad choice if someone talks to you during class? And so this is a way, even though we didn't act out the bad way, like the bad choice way, and I love the term bad choice. We're going to get to that later on as well. But that way they know that there's a wrong way to do things too. So it's like, okay, I know what's right, I know what's wrong. So I think it's important to also talk about, hey, what don't we? We learn what to do. Now what do we not do? So that they have a more holistic view of the situation. Before moving on to the next skill, the students will repeat after me. When I ask them, what do you do when someone tries to get you off task? And they should all respond, ignore. And then I might say, say it again in your funniest voice or your silliest voice. And that's just a way for them to, the repetition, it sticks in their head. And it makes it fun again. That's a way of making it fun. Because if they just say ignore, that's not fun. Let's do it in a fun voice. Let's do it, you may not want to say your loudest voice because there's other people around, but a funny voice or something like that might be a good thing to say. My skill 2 is talk it out. Unlike this one, you can't really define it. So first I would ask them, how does it feel when someone yells at you or puts their hands on you? Because I don't know anyone who likes being yelled at. And then also no one likes to be touched unless, it's like a hug from your friend. That's different. But, we're mainly talking about, fighting. Just putting in more nice words, I guess you could say. After that, I would say instead we can talk it out or talk to our friend and tell them how we feel. And that's just a way of kind of explaining what talk it out means. Because again, if I just say talk it out, they know what talk means, but talk it out, it's like, okay. The skill is important for expressing feelings and needs, and that was also a point that the responsive counselor emphasized, so I wanted to give her credit for that as well. Definitely agreed with it, and yeah, really wanted to give her credit for that. And so again, I think this one really needs an example just because talk it out, we've talked about what it means, but now let's put it to practice. So Sheila tells her friend Darla that it's her turn to play on the swing. Darla does not get off the swing and keeps playing on it. The next day when they run to the swings, Darla gets there first. Sheila tells her how it makes her sad when she cannot play on the swing, and maybe they can take turns so they can both have fun. And what I like about this situation is it shows it doesn't show any fighting, which actually, again, this is a situation that really happened. Unfortunately, did not turn out like this. The kids actually fought over the swing because, again, swings, we don't have enough for every single kid. If every single second grader wanted to swing, there's definitely not enough. And what I like about this is that she made it is that I had the student frame it in a way so that they can both have fun. Hey, I'm not trying to just take the swing just for me, but let's both have it. Let's both take turns so we can both have fun. Not just so I can have fun or just so you can have fun, but so we can both have fun. And again, it's kind of showing that, how that working together, that conflict resolution, it's a compromise. Hey, because, Sheila might want to swing the whole time. Darla might want to swing the whole time, but, that's not fair. So we got to do it, we got to find a compromise where we can both have fun. So I would grab a chair because I wouldn't want to take them out to the playground because kids are probably having recess at that time and that wouldn't be appropriate. And the chairs need to represent a swing. We don't need a real swing. So I would grab a chair and tell a student this is our imaginary or pretend swing. I'll make sure the students knew that. And then I would have 2 students act it out. Again, 2 different students, hopefully. To avoid running in the room and injuries, one student will sit in the chair. So again, I'm not going to have them pretend like they're running to the swing, how in the scenario, because I don't want anyone getting hurt. So again, one student will sit in the chair, and the other student who wants and the other student will be the student who wants to swing, aka that student wants to sit in the chair. The student who is not in the chair will tell her friend how it makes her feel when she does not share. And again, the feelings might be different than the scenario, and that's okay. She could be angry and not sad. That's fine. It's because that's important too, is to validate their feelings. Because one thing I always taught my kids too, you can feel however you want, but you can't act however you want. I can't tell you not to be mad, angry, sad. Kind of like I would teach them, you don't have to like me, but you have to respect me, because they don't have to like me. And then it's kind of like when you give them that choice, like it's amazing. Like even at a young age, like I recommend it. Reflect. So what are other things, like I would ask them, what are other things people do to hurt your feelings? Again, not all of them, like I can hear some of those boys now saying, I don't care about swings. And guess what? Some of them don't care about swings. And that's okay, because we're going to think about other things, other situations. And we're going to explore other scenarios the students have encountered, and if time permits, explore those personal examples. So if we have time, let's do another example that is more relevant to them that maybe I didn't think of because I'm not a current 7 and 8-year-old student. So this would be a really good opportunity for, again, them to be the teacher, because again, I'm not trying to teach at them, I'm trying to teach with them. So and I also said, or how they could have handled it better. So they could give examples of, hey, this one time I made a bad choice and beat up my brother because he took the remote from me. And then it's like, okay, well, what could you have done instead of beat up your brother? And then again, that gives them a way to think about, like, okay, I made a bad choice this time, but what could I have done so that I don't make a bad choice in the future? Because it's like, okay, you got in trouble once, you don't want to get in trouble again, so what can you do to avoid getting in trouble? No one likes getting in trouble. So before moving on, ask the students to repeat what 2 skills we have learned so far. And again, I didn't put it in the PowerPoint, but I think it's really important for, like, to not just say, okay, ignore, talk it out. Like, maybe the first time have them say that, but then the second time, say it in your silliest voice. Okay, now we're going to say it in our, I don't know, Miss Ben's voice. Maybe they could try and talk like me. I'd be curious. Kids always tell me I have a very deep voice, so maybe they'll do in a very low voice. I don't know. Skill 3 is count to 10. I like this one. I really do. I would ask the students to count to 10 inside their heads. Again, and I'll talk about this more in like the needs section, or like the special circumstances. One thing I would have to keep in mind is my newcomer students may not know how to count. Like I know that math is universal, so some of them did. However, some of them hadn't been in school before, especially some of the ones especially when I had girls from the Middle Eastern regions, they had never been in school before, and some of their parents hadn't been either. So even like numbers, even though like, yes, math is like known as kind of being universal, so to speak, because of numbers, sometimes they can't count to 10. And then also I have kids with special needs. Some of them, yeah, they can't count to 10. But most of them can. So I would, in this case, I would say count to 10 in your heads. If it was like if it was, to 100, that'd be different. Then we would have to definitely, differentiate. But 10, most of them would be able to do. I would then explain that sometimes, I would then explain that sometimes when someone makes us mad, we can make bad choices by doing what our angry brain tells us to do. Tells us to do things that can hurt you or someone else. So here we're labeling it. So we're calling it like whenever we're angry. So sometimes when we're angry, we make bad choices. So what can we do about that? So I would then ask for volunteers, what is a bad choice you made or saw someone else make when you or they were very angry? So again, they can either talk about themselves if they want to give an example, or they can give an example about someone else. Now, I would discourage giving examples of people that are in the class. I probably should have put that in there, so that would be a disclaimer, is like, let's not talk about anybody that's in this classroom. But if you want to talk about some bad mistake that you made, or if you want to say one time my friend, but, I would want to make sure that we're not, like, saying one time Dylan, and Dylan's right next to him, and maybe like, no. So then we're going to have to use these skills. I guess it's a good thing we're doing this class. I would ask, so that we can make better choices if we sit down and count to 10 and then decide if we need to talk it out, ignore, or report to a teacher. So again, like kind of what I was talking about. Sometimes we can talk it out. Sometimes we can ignore. Sometimes we need to report to a teacher. And I didn't say tattling, I said reporting, because as a teacher, I think it's very important to teach the difference between tattling and reporting, especially with these littles. So let's go to the next slide. So count to 10. Here's a scenario. So Susie cut Mariah in the lunch line. Susie is very angry because she had been waiting her turn and following the rules. Mariah really wants to push her out of the way or yell at her that she is cutting. Instead, Mariah closes her eyes and counts to 10. After that, she taps Susie on the shoulder and tells her in her inside voice, and I used to use that term because kids usually know inside voice, outside voice. At our school, we use levels too, so I might say a level 0 for my school, but I wanted to say inside voice because I think that's more universal. If I said level 0, you guys may not have known what that meant. She cut it, or not a level 0. Level 0 would be no talking, sorry. A level 1. Level 1's a whisper. I guess you could have said it a level 2 as well. There's a lot of levels. So now in this scenario, I would have one case where Susie listens and apologizes and goes to the end of the line, and one where Susie doesn't act so nicely and tells Mariah, I can do what I want, and stays in the line. Because that has happened. I would ask the students, which one should Susie have done? So in this situation, kind of because of like all the situations that we're dealing with and all the factors, we're not acting it out as much as like thinking about this situation and our own situations. So first, again, like I said, the first thing I would ask is, I would ask the students which one should Susie have done. So should Susie have pushed her out of the line, and they should be able to tell me, no, Susie should have said I'm sorry and gone to the end of the line. And I'm gonna ask them, what should Mariah do if Susie stays in the line? And I would make sure they knew, like, I would ask them, I would say, should we ignore them? Should we talk it out? And like, the goal would be to see, we can do both. We can ignore it and say, you know what, not worth it, but they probably won't like that one. So talking out's probably gonna be the one they like the most. So, and I think that's a fine skill to say, is let's talk it out. And we would explain that if Susie continues to make these bad choices, then it's time to report to a teacher. So again, use these conflict resolution skills first. So if you tell Susie, hey, it really hurts my feelings when you cut in line, can you wait? Is it okay if you wait in line just like the rest of us have to? And then, again, if you ask her and then she doesn't do it, then it's like, then you can tell the teacher, hey, I did do this. She's still cutting in front of me. And then it's reporting and not tattling. So now we have the barriers. So again, language barriers with ESL, or again, they're now called emerging bilingual students. So that would be the barriers with this, is that I would have some students who, again, were newcomers that year. So like, they did not, like, they were learning English in my classroom. That was their only, and then in the community as well. But usually they would stay within wherever they were, the hub center that they were at. So they would speak with other people from the region that they came from. So I think most of their English exposure was at school. So realizing that, some kids, like, that just might be a factor, and we gotta do our best to find ways. It was hard because when they would register with an advocate, and sometimes the parents, they like would be there, but they wouldn't be involved in any of it, and we would never see the parent. They lived kind of together, which was cool for them. That they were able to all kind of like bond, because I'm sure that's a good thing to have, like a bonding, to be able to bond over, because I'm sure that's a very, very difficult thing that I sure will never understand. And so I definitely felt a lot for those children. But with that being said, again, they just don't have a lot of exposure to English. Their parents don't speak English. So I think that's, just something, like when I'm working with those students, we need to find other avenues to, because again, a lot of this involves knowing the English language. Cultural barriers with newcomer students. Again, when my newcomer students came, like the way that the boys played was rough. Like they would hit each other, and they didn't really realize it was bad, like, or a bad choice. Like they didn't realize that wasn't a good thing that's just how they play. That's how they were socialized. And I think that's super important to take into account that not every place is America. So if you're getting a student from another country, you gotta, understand they're gonna have different customs. And even when you talk to their parent, even if I, bring this to their parents' attention, they may not even understand like what the big deal is. So again, just cultural barriers. Limited time, as we've learned in our textbook, we want those 25-minute sessions for these lower grades. So, you want to make sure that you're giving enough examples where the kids understand it, but also, they have to get back to class, and also there's, only so much time they can probably focus on. So where you want to make sure it's as effective as possible. So limited time could definitely be a barrier. Parents might teach other lessons. This was something I got a lot, especially that year. Is my dad or mom said, if he hits me first, then I can hit him back. I got that all the time. I had a kid bring boxing gloves to school one time, and the mom got mad at me for not giving them back to her. And I said, "Ma'am," not giving it back to the child. I said I would give it back to her, but I couldn't give it back to the child because they were considered a weapon. And she goes, "They're not a weapon, they're a toy." They were real boxing gloves. They weren't toys. They weren't like those blow up ones. Like they were like real ones that you would like see like at a gym. So like, yeah, some parents teach their kids different things, and I think it's important to say like, while we're at school, we do this. That's what I would always say, because that way you're not saying like, well, your parent taught, that's not right. Like, you're not talking negatively about their parent, because that's not even my goal. I'm not telling them how to parent their child. But it's like, while they're at school, there are rules that need to be followed. And it's kind of like, too, like there's my rules and there's school rules, and we have to follow those. And those aren't mom and dad's rules. So that's, something that is very important, because again, a lot of my kids will tell you, and they are taught that. And again, I have a lot of parents that will tell me too, well, he hit him first. And it's like, okay, yeah. So that's a barrier. I'll put it that way. And then students with disabilities, this one kid that comes to my mind, I love that kid. I miss him so much. He couldn't even write his name. And that's just the reality of it, is that we have students at all different levels. So when we're teaching these lessons, really making it so that we're reaching as many kids as we can, and not, overestimating their abilities, because, especially in my school, it's so diverse, and I want to make sure that every kid is getting heard and getting an opportunity to, participate in that. Like, oh, you can't count, because this child might have struggled counting to 10. I'm not going to lie. He might have. And I think it's important that he participates in the little lesson just as much as anyone else. So if that's like, I remember I used to give him an alphabet chart when we would do like things with letters. So I think like giving him a numbers chart, for example, would be good to help him like go like from 1, 2, 3, and that would be something I could use with my students that are new to the country as well, my newcomer students. However, also be super important to recognize. I had one who was like he was so good at math. He was so good at math. It blew me away how smart he was. I was like, wow. It was amazing. So with him, that would be insulting. I would not give him a numbers chart. And I think that's very important to understand, is like, do not assume just because they're a newcomer, they don't know how to count to 10, because I did have some that could count to 10. I also had some that definitely could not. So it's important to know those individual differences. Resources, classroom and basic classroom supplies can be used. Like I said, we don't need to have a swing. We can use a chair. If they want to do a dinner table scenario, we can use markers and pencils. We don't need to use, actual utensils. So, again, being flexible is very important in a Title I school. Students, we can't do the lesson without the students. I'm not trying to teach myself, even though it is good stuff. Awareness that these students come from varying backgrounds and cultures. Again, I spoke about that in detail in the previous slide. You probably don't want to hear me go through that again. like just like I said in the slide previously, again, students have been raised to handle conflicts differently at home. And last bullet, I want to be clear to not shame the parent what parents have taught, but instead framing, like I said, like framing while we are at school, we do such and such. Because again, I'm not trying to tell them their parents aren't teaching them right or anything of that nature. It's not my job to be their parent. It's my job to, in this situation, be their school counselor and also do what's right by them, which is at school we do this. So if your parents are teaching you something else, that's for when you're with them. One last thing, and I know this isn't really, I mean, it is relevant, but I know it wasn't asked for on the thing, but this is something that is so important to me. I teach it to my kids every single year, and yeah, so kids are not bad. That is so important to know that there is no such thing as a bad kid. You made a bad choice, but you are not a bad kid. A bad choice does not define you. And what's important about that is sometimes they're not told that by their parents. Sometimes their parents just say, like, because they'll tell me, my mom says I'm bad, and I will say in that case, I'll be like, she means you made a bad choice. And then what's really cool is when they go back and they take that back to their parents, because they'll come back to me and be like, Miss Benz, my mom said you're right. She said, yeah, it's a bad choice. And it's like, see, sometimes the parents don't even know the right language to say, and they're not trying to, make their kid feel like a bad kid as a whole, but making sure they know they made a poor choice whenever they hit the other kid or whenever they cut in line. That doesn't define them. That's just the choice that they made. Um, Again, I will always include this. It's way too important, and I'm going to end it on that because that is the most important thing. There aren't bad kids, just kids that make bad choices. And we've all made a bad choice as a child.